Sometimes, destiny does not knock softly, but bursts in like a blizzard in the dead of winter. 4 years ago, Abigail Hayes left in silence, carrying a tiny, burgeoning life and a heart shattered by the unintentional neglect of her soldier husband. She thought she would never have to face the past again. But then, in an emergency room thick with the scent of antiseptic, as her only son's life faded in her arms, that same man reappeared. He was not the husband of years past. He stood there as an army doctor, the very man holding the life of his own son in his hands, completely unaware. A secret buried for 4 years, a tear-soaked reunion on the precipice of life and death, and the delayed remorse of a man who had once chosen his country and forgotten his home. Come, quiet your heart, and listen to this story, gut-wrenching yet deeply human, and see if the sun truly does shine after the storm. The cold in Washington, D.C. In the last days of the year was not just a chill that slipped through layers of clothing. It was like 1,000 tiny needles piercing the skin, a cold that seeped into the very marrow of your bones. Abby glanced at the clock. It was almost 2 a.m. In her cramped, sub-150-square-foot studio apartment on the city's outskirts, the wind whistling through the cracks of the rotted wooden window frame sounded like the weary sigh of a desperate soul. But the sound that truly tightened its grip on her heart was not the wind. It was the shallow, intermittent wheezing of little Noah, cradled in her lap. She pressed her gaunt hand to his forehead. It was scorching. The heat, like a consuming fire, sent a violent shiver through her. The digital thermometer flashed 104.4 degrees. It was a number high enough to shatter the last vestiges of a single mother's composure. Frantically, Abby wrapped her son in an old fleece blanket, grabbed a hastily packed diaper bag, and plunged into the street. The night was ink black, illuminated only by the faint, jaundiced glow of a few streetlights on the deserted pavement. She ran, her bare feet in flimsy flip-flops slapping against the frigid asphalt. Abby felt no pain, only the terrifying sense that her son's breaths were growing weaker against her shoulder. "Is anyone there? Please, help us," Abby choked out, her throat raw from the cold wind and sheer terror. By a stroke of luck, a late-night taxi spotted her at the end of the alley. The driver saw her pale face and the listless child in her arms and, without a word, slammed on the accelerator, heading for the nearest military hospital, Walter Reed. Walter Reed National Military Medical Center at night was eerily silent. The long corridors stretched on, filled with the overpowering smell of disinfectant and old plaster. Abby, carrying her son, burst into the emergency area, her legs threatening to buckle beneath her. "Doctor, please save my son. His fever is so high, he won't wake up," she screamed, her voice cracking in the quiet space. Immediately, the sound of firm footsteps echoed from within. A team of medical staff rushed out with a gurney, led by a man in a doctor's uniform. His white coat, hastily thrown on, was only partially buttoned, revealing the rugged, stern demeanor of a true soldier. "Calm down, ma'am. Put the boy here." That voice was deep, resonant, and full of authority. Abby froze. That voice, even after 4 years, honed by hardship to be sharper, more seasoned, was still potent enough to make every memory inside her detonate like a slow-motion explosion. She lifted her head, her messy hair clinging to her tear-streaked face. Under the glaring white LED lights of the emergency room, the man's face came into sharp focus. Ethan still had those same thick eyebrows that arched slightly when he concentrated, the same high, straight bridge of his nose, and the same deep-set eyes that always looked reality square in the face. But the Ethan of today wore the rank of a major and a face weathered by the sun and winds of some far-flung deployment. The hands that once stroked her hair were now deftly checking Noah's pupils and heart rate. Ethan paused for the briefest of moments when he saw Abby. A flash of profound shock, a powerful tremor beneath the soldier's calm exterior, flickered in his eyes. But the professionalism of a doctor did not allow him to hesitate for more than a second. He turned to a nurse and gave a crisp order. "The boy is showing signs of febrile seizure. Prep an IV with antipyretics and a low-dose sedative. Now, check his airway. Suction the mucus immediately." The nurses rushed the gurney into a private trauma room. Abby tried to follow but was stopped by another nurse. "You need to wait out here, ma'am. The doctor will handle it." The emergency room door swung shut in her face. She stood there, peering through the small glass window, watching Ethan lean over her son. His hands were firm yet incredibly gentle. He pressed a stethoscope to Noah's chest, the child whose existence he never knew. The child named Noah, a name they once joked about giving a son. Abby staggered back and collapsed onto a cold metal bench in the hallway. Her mind was a complete blank. Why now? Why him? She had run for 4 years, had tried to build a wall between her past and present with all the strength of a broken woman. She had sworn that she would rather die than ever go back to him, than ever let him see her in this pathetic state. And yet, now, her son's life lay in the hands of the man she both loved and hated more than anyone in the world. Time seemed to congeal. The steady beeping of the heart monitor from inside echoed out, each beat a hammer blow against her ribs. Abby looked down at her hands. They were still trembling, dirt from the street caked under her nails. She remembered Ethan's long deployments 4 years ago. The missed calls that were never returned, the feeling of the large house growing as cold and sterile as a morgue, as she endured the lonely pain of being a soldier's wife. She remembered the day she held the ultrasound result, intending to drive to his base, only to be told he had been deployed on an urgent mission to Afghanistan. All communication was lost. Sacrifice is a beautiful word people use for praise, but for the one left behind, it is a long, slow erosion of the soul. Abby had been worn down until she had nothing left to lose, except for Noah. About 40 minutes later, the door opened again. Nurses wheeled Noah out to transfer him to the recovery ward. The child was still now, his face no longer flushed with fever, his breathing starting to even out. Abby rushed forward, but her steps faltered when she saw Ethan walk out right behind him. He removed his surgical mask, revealing a tired face, but his eyes were as sharp as a scalpel. He stood 2 paces from Abby, a distance not so great, but one that seemed to hold an entire ocean of shattered pieces. He did not look at her at first, instead focusing on the medical chart. His voice still held the professional tone of a doctor speaking to a patient's family, but if you listened closely, you could hear a choked-up quality hidden beneath. "His fever has broken. It was acute pneumonia that led to the high fever and seizure. You were lucky to get here when you did." Another 10 minutes, and it would have been hard to say. Ethan looked up, and this time, he looked directly into Abby's eyes. It was no longer the gaze of a doctor. It was the gaze of a man seeing a piece of his own life that he had lost. He took in her appearance, from her tangled hair and swollen eyes to her thin clothes in the middle of winter. A wave of pain, self-reproach, and even anger surged within him. 4 years, Abby. "Is this how you've been living?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly, like stones rolling in a dry creek bed. Abby did not answer. She just watched Noah being wheeled further away. She wanted to appear proud, to say that she was fine, but the stark reality before him made any words feel absurd. She turned her face away, avoiding his gaze. "Thank you for saving my son, doctor. I'll take care of the bill." Ethan gripped the file in his hand so tightly his knuckles turned white. The words "doctor" and "my son" coming from her mouth were like a direct slap to his ego. He looked at the child being wheeled away, then back at Abby. In his mind, the simplest calculation yielded the truth. The boy was about 4 years old. He had the exact same ears as him, and the way he furrowed his brow, even in a deep sleep, was identical to how Ethan looked when facing a difficult case. He took a step forward, so close that Abby could smell the distinct scent of the military mixed with antiseptic on him. "Abby, don't you use that tone with me. That boy, who is he?" Abby retreated, her back hitting the cold hallway wall. She looked up, her gaze full of defiance and desperation. "He's my son. Just my son, Ethan. You don't need to be overly concerned with your patients." Ethan said nothing, but his chest heaved powerfully under his uniform. He stared deep into her eyes, as if searching for a crack in her brittle facade. The silence between them stretched, so heavy it could have suffocated anyone passing by. At the end of the hall, the sounds of nurses' footsteps and the clatter of medical carts continued, but in this corner, time seemed to have stopped. Ethan slowly raised a hand, intending to touch her shoulder in a gesture of comfort, but he stopped halfway. He looked at his own hand, the hand that had just saved his son's life without knowing it, and a terrible sense of guilt began to gnaw at his soul. "What's his name?" Ethan asked again, his voice much softer now, carrying a hint of pleading. "Noah," Abby answered curtly, her gaze lost in the distance. Ethan repeated the name in his head. Noah. A simple, small name, yet it carried all the hopes of a home he had once promised her. He looked down at her worn-out flip-flops. One strap was broken. Her feet are purple from the cold. Without a second thought, he shrugged off his thick army service coat. Before Abby could react, he draped it over her shoulders. She tried to push it away, but Ethan held her firmly by the shoulders, his voice rough but filled with anguish. "Wear it. Are you trying to get sick yourself?" "Who will take care of your son then?" Abby froze. The word son coming from his lips now sounded so strange, yet so painful. She stopped resisting the coat. The warmth from the thick fabric and the familiar scent of Ethan enveloped her, causing the defensive walls she had so painstakingly built to suddenly develop massive cracks. She bowed her head, and warm tears fell silently onto the olive-drab fabric of the military coat. Ethan stood there, watching the woman he had once loved most in the world tremble in his coat. He knew this night was just the beginning, a painful but unavoidable one. Under the dim hallway lights, their two shadows stretched long on the cold linoleum floor. Ethan turned to look towards the recovery room where the small boy lay. In his mind, the pieces of his career, his ideals as a soldier, and his responsibilities as a man began to violently shift. He understood that from this moment on, his life would never again be as straightforward as a patrol along a desolate border. Outside the hospital window, the first snowflakes of the season began to fall, light and airy, yet carrying the weight of an entire sky of memories. Ethan stood rooted to the spot in the empty corridor, feeling as though he had just survived a brutal firefight where the enemy's only weapon was a name, Noah. The army coat was still draped over Abby's shoulders, its olive-drab color looking out of place on her thin frame. But it was the only thing keeping her from collapsing onto the cold tile floor. He wanted to say something, a soldier's decisive question or an ex-husband's word of comfort, but his throat was choked with the smell of antiseptic and the bitter taste of regret. Abby did not look at him again. She trudged after her son's gurney toward the pediatric recovery ward. The scuffing of her flip-flops on the floor was a steady, rhythmic sound, each scrape like a knife twisting in Ethan's gut. He watched her retreating back, seeing the entire landscape of loneliness she had carried for 4 years made manifest in her high, bony shoulders. Ethan couldn't leave. He was on duty, with other patients waiting, but his feet led him toward his office to check the admission records for the pediatric patient who had just arrived. On the temporary intake form, the mother's name was listed as Abigail Hayes. The father's name was left blank, a void so vast and cold it made Ethan's heart ache. The boy's name was Noah Hayes, age 4. Noah. Ethan whispered the name. His own name was Ethan. He had once promised to take Abby on a trip to the coast to see the sea lions after a long training exercise. That exercise had stretched on indefinitely, and when he returned, the house was filled only with the smell of dust and a haunting silence. Ethan returned to the recovery room. He stood outside, peering through the small glass pane in the door. Abby was sitting on a simple wooden stool, her hand tightly gripping Noah's small hand where an IV line was inserted. She was not sleeping, though her eyes were sunken into dark circles, clearly visible under the dim nightlight. Occasionally, she would lean down, pressing her cheek against his tiny hand, her lips moving as if in prayer or soft reassurance. Ethan quietly pushed the door open and stepped inside. Abby flinched. Reflexively, she jumped to her feet, her eyes filled with the wariness of a small animal protecting its only young. "Don't be afraid. I'm just here to check his breathing," Ethan said softly, using the formal I to ease the tension that suffocated the room. He approached the bed. Now that Noah was lying still, his breathing less labored, Ethan had the chance to observe the child closely. His heart seemed to skip a beat. This boy didn't just resemble him in the eyebrows or nose. He had a tiny mole right on his left earlobe, the exact spot his own mother always said was the mark of the Pierce family. The child's eyes flickered in his sleep, his long, curled eyelashes the only feature he inherited from Abby. Ethan reached out with his large hand, calloused from holding both scalpels and rifles, and gently touched the boy's forehead. The fever had subsided, but the child's skin was still pale, sallow from malnourishment. He could feel the weak but resilient pulse beneath the thin skin. A strange current ran down his spine. This was his flesh and blood. This was the result of those passionate nights before he left for the front lines, a seed of life that had quietly grown while he was engrossed in his ideals and in saving his comrades in the deep wilderness. "Why did you hide him?" Ethan asked. His voice was no longer a cross-examination but the choked sob of a man who had just realized he had lost a priceless treasure. Abby looked down at her hands, her fingers intertwined so tightly they turned white. "Hide him? Ethan, did you ever spend more than 10 minutes on the phone with me without being cut off by a duty call? Were you ever home for more than 2 days without having to sling your pack and leave in the middle of the night?" She looked up, her eyes red but firm. "The day I found out I was pregnant with Noah, I ran to the base. They told me you had been deployed to a remote unit, completely out of contact. I stood there in the pouring rain, my stomach cramping, and I realized that if I continued this marriage, my son would grow up knowing his father only through medals and rushed phone calls. I didn't want my son to have to wait for someone who might never come back." Ethan was silent. Abby's every word was like a bullet piercing his chest. He was a good army doctor. He had saved hundreds of soldiers, but he had let the woman he loved most wither away in loneliness in their own home. He was proud of the uniform he wore, but he had forgotten that behind the soldier's resilience was the silent, often bitter, sacrifice of the one at home. "I'm sorry," Ethan whispered. The words felt cheap and weightless compared to the 4 years of hardship she and their son had endured. "It's not your fault," Abby said with a bitter smile. "It was my fault for being too naive about a soldier's love. I'm awake now. Dr. Pierce, my son is stable. You can go rest. I'll handle the paperwork for his transfer or discharge in the morning. I don't want to interfere with your work." "Discharge?" Ethan growled, the fury of a father erupting. "Back to that damp, cramped apartment so his lungs can fail again? Do you have any idea he just escaped death's door? As his attending physician, I will not allow this patient to be discharged in his current condition." Abby shot up, facing him. "What right do you have to keep us here? A doctor's right, or the right of the man who signed the divorce papers 4 years ago without a second glance?" Ethan stepped forward, cornering her against the edge of the bed. He leaned down, his hot breath, a mix of mint and exhaustion, close to her face. "I have the right of his father. Did you think you could hide him forever when this boy looks at me with my own eyes?" Abby trembled. Her defensive wall was shaking violently. She tried to push him away, but Ethan was quicker. He gripped her shoulders, not to force her but to keep her from collapsing. He saw a tear trace a path down her gaunt cheek. All his hardness melted away, leaving only infinite sorrow. "Abby, stop running. I let you go once, and it was the biggest mistake of my life. Look at our son. He needs a doctor, but he also needs a father who can stand up and protect him right now." Suddenly, Noah stirred, a tiny whimper breaking the tense atmosphere. "Mommy, Mommy." Abby instantly pushed Ethan's hands away and turned to embrace her child. "I'm here, Noah. I'm right here." Ethan stepped back, giving her space. He watched the skillful, instinctual way she soothed the child. Then he looked down at his own uniform coat, still draped over the back of a chair. Its olive-drab color was a reminder of the honor, of the duty he had inadvertently abandoned when it came to his own family. From the hallway, the hurried footsteps of the night shift nurse echoed, signaling a new emergency. Ethan straightened his uniform. He knew he had to go, but his heart was chained to this room, to the delirious child and the woman covered in scars, both inside and out. "I have to handle my shift. If Noah needs anything, press the call button. And don't even think about leaving, because even if you walk out of this hospital's gates, I will find you," Ethan said, his voice carrying the conviction of a soldier's oath. He turned to leave, but as his hand touched the doorknob, he paused. Without looking back, his deep voice echoed. "Abby, keep the coat. The night is long, and the chill in this military hospital isn't as gentle as you think." The door closed, leaving Abby in the silent room with the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor. She watched Ethan's tall figure disappear behind the frosted glass. Her heart, which she thought had turned to cold ash, began to smolder with painful embers. She looked down at Noah, sleeping peacefully under the protection of the bloodline he never knew. Noah's tiny hand accidentally brushed against the rough fabric of the coat Ethan had left behind, like an invisible thread pulling their two separate worlds back together in the cruelest of ways. Ethan walked down the corridor, the fluorescent lights overhead flickering like his own mind. He knew that when the sun rose, this truth would no longer be a private matter between them. His mother, Catherine, would certainly not stay quiet when she found out her only son had an heir living in destitution. And Brooke, the woman who was always trying to weave her way into his life through political maneuvering, would definitely not stand by and watch his happiness bloom from the ashes of his past. Ethan clenched his fists, a strange determination burning in his eyes. He was no longer the naive young doctor from 4 years ago. He had tasted gunpowder, had seen enough of life and death, and this time he would use everything he had to hold on to the most precious thing he had just found in the middle of a winter's night. The faint light of the winter morning filtered through the hospital's hazy windows, casting pale, cold streaks across the floor. Abby sat in the same position as she had hours before, her shoulders seeming to slump even further under the weight of a sleepless night. Ethan's army coat still enveloped her. The warmth from its lining had faded, but his characteristic scent, a blend of the harsh sun from some foreign land and clean, simple soap, still lingered, a reminder of a time she once considered the smell of home. The sound of the morning reveille from the nearby base echoed, crisp and definitive. Abby flinched slightly. The memories, carried on that bugle call, rushed back like a flood breaking through a dam. She remembered her first days as Ethan's wife. Whenever that call sounded, Ethan would spring out of bed like a released coil, hastily buckling his utility belt, giving her a quick kiss on the forehead, and disappearing behind the door. Back then, Abby was barely in her 20s, still viewing life as the wife of a military doctor through rose-colored glasses. She thought she could endure anything as long as their love was strong enough. But love, no matter how vast, could not fill the immense void of his absence. Abby looked down at her hands. The tips of her fingers were calloused from years of contact with cleaning chemicals at the diner where she worked. 4 years ago, these hands were soft, their only tasks holding a pen and arranging fresh flowers on the windowsill while she waited for her husband to come home. She vividly remembered the loneliness that began to gnaw at her during the solitary dinners. The table was set for two bowls, 2 sets of silverware, but one side was always pristine. Abby would sit there, staring at the empty chair opposite her, listening to the ticking of the clock, each tick marking the slow decay of her patients. On duty, field exercises, forward deployment, those phrases sounded heroic at first, but they gradually became invisible barriers dividing their lives. Ethan wasn't wrong. He was fulfilling his duty to his country, to the uniform he wore. But within that grand duty, there seemed to be no room for the small fears of a young wife every time darkness fell upon their small house tucked away in a quiet alley. The breaking point came in the winter 4 years ago, on a brutally cold day just like this one. Abby realized she had missed her period. She held the pregnancy test with its 2 distinct lines, her hands trembling with a mixture of joy and anxiety. She wanted to scream, to run to his unit and throw her arms around him, but his phone went straight to voicemail. Ethan was in some jungle on the other side of the world, part of an emergency disease control mission in a remote region. A week, 2 weeks, then a month passed. Abby suffered through terrible morning sickness. She would vomit at the mere smell of food, her face gaunt, her eyes circled with dark rings from sleeplessness. During nights of high fever, or when her lower abdomen cramped with the threat of miscarriage, Abby could only hug Ethan's pillow, inhaling his lingering scent to calm herself. She told herself, "He's a doctor. He's saving people. Our child will be proud of his father one day." But a woman's pride and resilience have their limits. The day Abby went for a prenatal checkup alone, watching other couples support each other, the husbands anxiously asking about their wives every step, while she clutched her medical form in solitude, her heart suddenly shattered. She stood in the middle of the crowded hospital corridor, tears streaming down her face, unstoppable. They were not tears of weakness, but of a brutal awakening. She was raising her child alone, even while she was still married. When Ethan returned from his long deployment, gaunt and dark from the sun, he was greeted not by his wife's warm embrace, but by a set of divorce papers placed neatly on the wooden table. Ethan had been stunned. He didn't understand. He asked why. "What did I do wrong? I was working for our future." Abby remembered looking at him then with a strangely calm expression. She didn't scream, didn't blame. She just asked one question. "Ethan, if I died in this house tomorrow, would you know right away? Or would you only find my body when you came back after your shift was over?" Ethan was silenced, and he signed. He signed because of a man's pride, because of a soldier's ego, wounded by the thought that his wife lacked the grace to support his career. He didn't know that behind those papers, Abby was carrying a new life, a child she was determined to protect from the same endless waiting that had consumed its mother. "Water, Mom." Noah's weak whisper pulled Abby from the swamp of her memories. She quickly poured some warm water onto a small spoon and gently brought it to his dry lips. Noah opened his eyes. They were still weary but had more life in them. "Mommy, where's the doctor soldier?" Noah asked, his voice still hoarse. Abby paused, the plastic spoon in her hand trembling slightly. He went to work, honey. How are you feeling, Noah?" "I'm not hurting anymore. Is this his coat, Mom? It smells nice." Noah reached out with his small hand to touch the wool fabric of the uniform coat draped over him. Abby's heart constricted. The bond of blood was a miraculous and terrifying thing. Though they had never met, though no one had told him, the child seemed to feel an invisible connection to the owner of this coat. She looked at her son, a wave of bitter sorrow rising in her throat. She had intentionally named him Noah, a strong name, as a secret way for him to always have his father with him. Yet she refused to let that father into his life. Was she being too selfish? The door to the room opened quietly. It wasn't Ethan, but a young nurse carrying a morning tray of medicine. "You're awake, Miss Hayes. Major Pierce asked me to bring some chicken noodle soup and medicine for the boy. He also said you have to eat all of this breakfast, or he won't let you stay with Noah tonight." The nurse smiled, placing a still warm, insulated container on the table. Abby looked at the container. A warmth spread through her fingertips, but her heart was in turmoil. Ethan was still the same, always caring in that decisive, somewhat commanding way of a military officer. But this concern now made Abby feel suffocated. "Where is Major Pierce?" Abby asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "He just finished an emergency surgery at 5 a.m. Now he's in a debriefing at the command office. He barely slept last night. He kept coming by this room every hour, just standing outside the window for a moment before leaving." The nurse said this while deftly checking Noah's temperature. Abby was speechless. The image of Ethan standing outside the window, silently watching over them all night, caused cracks to appear in her icy exterior. She remembered the Ethan of the past, before he was a seasoned military doctor. He had once stayed up all night to watch over her when she was sick, clumsily making a burnt pot of soup that was nonetheless full of sincerity. She opened the container. The fragrant aroma of chicken, noodles, and herbs rose up. This wasn't hospital food. This was the soup Ethan used to buy from a small diner near their old apartment whenever she felt unwell. He still remembered. He even remembered that she liked extra black pepper. Abby brought a spoonful to her lips. The savory taste of the broth and the spicy kick of the pepper blended together, but she found a bitter taste on her tongue. Her tears fell once more, dissolving into the hot soup. "Mommy, are you hurting somewhere?" Noah looked at his mother with concern. Abby quickly wiped her eyes and forced a smile. "No, honey, the soup is just hot. Be a good boy and eat with Mommy, okay?" Just then, the distinct sound of military boots clicking on the tile floor echoed from the hallway. The sound was all too familiar, heralding the return of the man in the olive-drab uniform. Abby quickly put the bowl down, smoothed her messy hair, and pulled Ethan's coat tighter around herself in a defensive reflex. The door opened. Ethan entered, his face washed with cold water to stave off sleep, but his eyes were still webbed with tiny red veins. He glanced at the half-eaten bowl of soup on the table, a flicker of relief in his eyes. "Awake, are we, champ?" Ethan approached the bed, a rare smile on his face as he saw Noah looking back at him. Noah looked at Ethan, then at the uniform he wore, his small eyes lighting up with pure admiration. "You're the soldier doctor from last night, right?" Ethan froze. The word "sir" from his own son's mouth was like a knife to the heart. He sat down on the edge of the bed, his large hand enveloping Noah's tiny one. "Yeah, that's me." "How are you feeling, Noah?" "The fever's gone. Your coat smells really good. Can I borrow it for a little bit?" Noah said innocently. Ethan glanced at Abby. She stood there, watching the father and son talk, her heart twisting in knots. The morning light, now brighter through the window, starkly illuminated the thin line between truth and concealment. Ethan took a deep breath. It seemed he had made a critical decision after a long night of internal struggle. "Abby, after you're done eating, we need to talk. Not about Noah's medical chart, about us." Ethan's voice was low but carried an undeniable weight. Abby looked into his eyes. She knew she could no longer hide in the shadows of the past. The wounds from 4 years ago, which she thought had scarred over, were now ripped open by this reunion, bleeding and demanding to be either healed or severed for good, in a way more painful than ever before. Outside the room, the shadow of an elegant woman lurked by the door, her sharp eyes staring intently at the child on the bed. It was Catherine, Ethan's mother, who had just received a tip about a child who looked exactly like Ethan in the pediatric ward of the military hospital. A new storm was gathering right in the heart of the hospital, a place where peace was already a luxury. The morning sunlight in the military hospital always had a certain tranquility, but for Abby, that quiet felt like the calm surface of a lake just before a hurricane. She was about to respond to Ethan's request to talk when the door was pushed open once more. It wasn't a member of the medical staff, but a woman who exuded an air of sharp elegance. Brooke Sinclair walked in. She was dressed in a tailored business suit, her high heels clicking on the linoleum, creating a sound completely alien to this space, saturated with the smell of antiseptic. Brooke wasn't just a colleague from the hospital's administrative department. She was the woman Catherine, Ethan's mother, had been subtly grooming to be her daughter-in-law after Abby left. "Ethan, I heard you had a rough night on duty, and that you ran into an old acquaintance." Brooke paused, her eyes sweeping over Abby with an undisguised contempt, then settling on the military coat draped over Abby's shoulders. Brooke's eyes narrowed, a flash of jealousy striking like lightning. She knew Ethan well. She knew that to a soldier, that coat was his honor. For him to place it on another woman was tantamount to a declaration of ownership. Ethan stood up, his expression instantly reverting to the cool demeanor of an officer on duty. He disliked Brooke meddling in his private affairs, especially at this precise moment. "Brooke, this is a pediatric patient's room. If you don't have professional business here, please leave." Brooke was unfazed. She flashed a practiced smile and approached Noah's bed. "I just wanted to visit the little boy. I heard he looks so much like you. I was curious." "Oh, look at him," she cooed, her voice turning sickly sweet, but it made Abby's skin crawl. "He really does. His name is Noah, right? His mother must have had a very hard time these past 4 years, raising him all alone in her circumstances." Abby clenched her fists. She heard the mocking tone aimed at her impoverished life. She stood up to face Brooke, her shoulders thin but held straight. "Thank you for your concern. Whether it was hard or not is my business. I don't think a stranger like you needs to worry about it." Brooke raised an eyebrow and turned to Ethan with a look of feigned sympathy. "See, Ethan? Abby still has that same stubborn streak. No wonder you two couldn't make it work back then." "Oh, Ethan, I just saw your mother downstairs. She's on her way up. You know how much she's wanted a grandchild, but some things, well, you can't just judge by appearances." Suddenly, a commotion sounded from the hallway. Catherine Pierce appeared, flanked by 2 assistants carrying baskets of fruit and expensive supplements. Catherine swept into the room like a queen surveying her new territory. She ignored Abby, treating her like thin air, and went straight to Noah's bedside. The moment she saw Noah's face looking up at her in confusion, her hands began to tremble. The uncanny resemblance between Noah and Ethan as a child was living proof she could not deny. Catherine was a pragmatic woman. She despised Abby for her family's lack of social standing, but she craved a legitimate grandson to carry on the Pierce name. This child, Catherine whispered, her usually sharp eyes suddenly clouded with emotion. "Mom, this is Noah. He's my son," Ethan said, his voice as firm as an oath before the flag. He didn't use the boy's pet name anymore. He wanted to affirm the child's identity in front of his mother. Abby felt her chest tighten. She wanted to grab Noah and run. She knew Catherine. Once she set her sights on something, she would use any means to get it. And this child was all Abby had. Catherine reached out to touch Noah's hand, but the boy flinched in fear, pressing himself deeper into Abby's side. Noah had never seen a woman so elegant, yet so cold. The sensitive child felt his mother trembling. He hugged her neck tightly, his face crumpling. "Mommy, I want to go home. Mr. Dr. Soldier, please let me go home." Noah's cries were like a knife twisting in Ethan's gut. He stepped forward, placing a hand on Abby's shoulder, trying to lend her some strength, but Abby shrugged it off. The arrival of Catherine and Brooke made her realize that the world she had run from was closing in on her again, with a pressure even more suffocating than before. Brooke stood beside Catherine, whispering in her ear, "Aunt Catherine, my heart goes out to the boy too, but Abby has been raising him alone for 4 years in less than ideal places. I worry it might have affected his health and his character. Besides, about his paternity, we should probably have it properly verified, just to be sure, to avoid any unpleasantness that could affect Ethan's military career later on." Brooke spoke softly, but loud enough for Abby to hear. It was a vicious blow. She was attacking Ethan's honor and Catherine's suspicion. Brooke's meaning was clear. Who knew if this child was really Ethan's, or if Abby was just using the resemblance to find support now that her life had become too difficult? Catherine paused, her expression shifting from emotional to suspicious. She looked at Abby, her voice cold. "Miss Hayes, you disappeared for 4 years without a word, and now you suddenly show up in my son's hospital with a child. Do you think the Pierce family is a place you can come and go as you please?" Abby laughed bitterly, her tears no longer falling, but freezing inside her into a block of ice. "Mrs. Pierce, I never intended to come back here and beg for anything. If my son hadn't been critically ill last night, you would never have had to see my face again. I repeat, Noah is my son. I don't need anyone's acknowledgement, nor do I need anyone to take responsibility." Ethan roared, his voice booming through the room. "Mom! Brooke! That's enough! Noah is my son. I feel it in my own flesh and blood. I will not allow anyone to insult Abby or my son again." Brooke's face paled. She had never seen Ethan this angry over a woman. The jealousy in her heart erupted into a vicious flame. She realized that no matter how poor or ragged Abby was, she held a place in Ethan's heart that Brooke could never touch. "Ethan, I was just worried about you," Brooke sobbed, feigning hurt. "I don't need your concern. Everybody, get out," Ethan ordered, pointing to the door. Catherine was furious, her face flushed red. "Ethan, how dare you kick your own mother out for this? This kind of woman? Do you know how much Brooke has helped our family these past 4 years? Are you going to throw away your career, your future, for a child of questionable origin?" Abby hugged Noah tightly. The boy was screaming in terror at the adults shouting. Abby looked at Ethan, then at Catherine, then at Brooke, who stood there with a triumphant look hidden behind her feigned hurt. She suddenly realized this hospital, this green uniform, and these people were still the shackles she could never break. She gently placed Noah back on the bed and began to pack her small bag. Her hands were trembling but resolute. "What are you doing?" Ethan grabbed Abby's arm, his eyes red with pain and helplessness. Abby looked at him, her gaze empty and cold. "I'm giving you back your peace, giving you back the brilliant future everyone is so afraid I'll ruin. Let go of me, Dr. Pierce." Ethan didn't let go. He held her wrist tightly, but Brooke quickly stepped in, gently placing a hand on his arm. "Ethan, calm down. Abby is just upset. Let her rest. Your mother is tired. Let me take her outside first." Catherine stormed out, but not before shooting one last, sharp glance at Abby. Brooke turned back to look at Abby, a faint, victorious smirk flickering on her lips. It was the smile of a hunter who had cornered her prey. Abby felt the military coat weighing heavily on her shoulders. She took it off and placed it back in Ethan's hands. The coat was still warm, but Abby's heart felt completely cold. She picked Noah up, Ignoring the IV lines a nurse had just temporarily disconnected and just wanted to leave this place immediately. But Ethan was blocking the door, his tall frame obscuring the entire exit like an insurmountable mountain. Ethan stood before the hospital room door like a fortress of steel and stone. Light from the hallway streamed in, carving his face into stark, determined shadows. He said nothing, but the rise and fall of his chest beneath his uniform shirt revealed the storm raging within him. Abby clutched Noah tightly, her thin arms wrapped around him as if the slightest loosening of her grip would allow the forces outside to sweep him away. "Move!" Abby's voice was a raw whisper, no longer a plea but a desperate command. Ethan looked down at her trembling form, at her eyes, bloodshot from a sleepless night of trauma, and his heart felt as though it were being pierced by 1,000 shards of glass. "Where do you think you're going with him in this condition? Out there, so the cold wind can snap what little strength he has left? Or so my mother can find you in some slum, and things can get even worse? That's not your problem," Abby screamed, fresh tears streaming down her face. "Your family has humiliated me enough. I may be poor, I may be a mess, but my son is not some commodity for you people to weigh against your brilliant future." Ethan took a step forward. Abby retreated until the backs of her legs hit the metal frame of the bed. He placed his hands on her shoulders, this time with a grip that was firm and stronger than ever before. "Listen to me, Abby. I don't care about my rank. I don't care what my mother says, and I don't care about Brooke's selfishness. The only thing I know right now is that this boy needs a doctor, and I am his father. I will not let you take him out there to suffer again." The word father, spoken from Ethan's lips, carried the weight of 1,000 pounds. Noah, who had been sobbing quietly, suddenly fell silent. He lifted his wide, tear-filled eyes to look at Ethan's resolute face. The 4-year-old may not have fully understood the title, but he felt a strange sense of protection from this man who carried the air of a soldier. Noah slowly reached out a tiny hand and touched the metal button on Ethan's uniform shirt, whispering, "You're Noah's dad?" The innocent question froze the room. Abby went limp, her arms holding her son beginning to shake uncontrollably. Ethan looked at his son, his eyes, so accustomed to tactical maps and cold surgical procedures, suddenly softened in a way he never thought possible. He knelt down on one knee to be at eye level with the boy, his calloused hand gently stroking Noah's soft hair. "Yeah, I'm Dad, and I'm sorry it took so long for me to be here for you and your mom." Abby let out a bitter, resentful laugh. "Dad? And what gives you the right? Where were you for the past 4 years when he had a fever in the middle of the night, when I had to scrape together every dollar to buy him formula? Now you see he looks like you, that he has Pierce blood, and you decide to claim him? You're too selfish, Ethan." Meanwhile, in an office down the hall, Catherine sat rigidly in a stiff-backed chair, her perfectly painted red lips pressed into a thin line. Brooke stood beside her, solicitously pouring a cup of ginger tea, though her eyes never stopped monitoring the powerful matriarch's expression. "Aunt Catherine, don't be angry with Ethan. He's always been a sentimental person. He just feels sorry for the poor child, that's all. But acknowledging a child is a serious family matter. You can't just accept him because of a resemblance," Brooke said softly, her words like honey, but in reality they were seeds of doubt. Catherine slammed the teacup down on the table. "He looks exactly like Ethan did as a boy. There's no mistaking that. But what I cannot accept is his mother. A woman who walks out without a word of goodbye, and now she comes back demanding her rights? The Pierce family is not a marketplace. If he truly is my grandson, I will bring him home and raise him properly. As for that Abby, it would be best if she took a sum of money and disappeared." Catherine, a woman forged in the hardships of a previous generation, believed that money and disciplined education could replace anything, including a mother's love. She did not understand, or refuse to understand, that a mother's heart like Abby's could not be bought at any price. Brooke smiled discreetly. This was exactly what she wanted. She didn't mind Ethan having a child, she only minded Abby's presence. If Abby disappeared, Brooke could become the perfect stepmother, a woman of status and feigned compassion, easily winning Ethan's respect and Catherine's approval. Back in the hospital room, the confrontation between Abby and Ethan had not subsided. Abby was less agitated now. She had slumped to the floor, hugging her knees. Ethan's coat, still draped over her, now felt like a heavy burden. Ethan sat near her, maintaining a distance that wouldn't frighten her, but close enough to hear her choked sobs. "The day you left, I hated you so much," Ethan began, his voice low, tinged with the smell of a cigarette he must have hastily smoked on a balcony. "I asked myself what I had done so wrong that you had to be so heartless. I threw myself into my work, volunteering for the most dangerous deployments, viewing death as a trifle because I thought there was no one left in the world waiting for me. I lived like a machine for 4 years." Abby looked up at him, her eyes empty. "You were a machine with a reputation, with a career. I was a pregnant woman running away from the world's scorn. Do you know what it's like to go through labor alone in a hospital? Everyone around me had a husband, a mother. I had no one. Do you know that when Noah was born and the nurse asked for the father's name for the birth certificate, I had to bite my lip until it bled to keep from saying your name?" Ethan clenched his fists, his knuckles turning white. He had never imagined those raw details. He had only thought she left because she fell out of love, because she couldn't handle the hardship. He never knew he owed her a debt that was as great as life itself. "I want to make it up to you. Not out of duty, but because I realize I still love you, and because this boy is everything I've ever wanted." "Make it up?" Abby stood, brushing the dust from her son's clothes. "Your mother wants to buy my son. That Brooke woman wants to be my son's mother. And you want to make it up by forcing me to face those people every day? That's not compensation, Ethan. That's a punishment." She picked up Noah, who had fallen asleep from exhaustion, his small head resting on her shoulder. Abby looked at Ethan, her gaze cold and final. "I will stay until Noah is completely healthy because I don't want him to be in any danger. But after that, you and I will have nothing to do with each other. Don't use your power as a doctor or a soldier to keep me here, because if you do, I will hate you for the rest of my life." Ethan watched in silence as Abby laid their son on the bed and turned her back to him. He felt his pride, the ego of a man who had always believed he was right, crumbling piece by piece. He was a commander. He could give orders to hundreds of soldiers, but before this woman, he was utterly powerless. Outside the window, the snow had stopped, replaced by a biting wind. Ethan stepped into the hallway. He saw Brooke standing there, leaning against the wall with a knowing smile. "Ethan, Catherine wants to see you in the administration office. She's drafted some papers. You should probably take a look." Ethan didn't look at Brooke. He walked past her as if she were a ghost. He knew he was about to face another battle, a battle between filial duty and family tradition on one side, and conscience and the love he had once lost on the other. But deep in his heart, the image of Noah's tiny hand touching his uniform button and the choked sound of him calling him Dad echoed, giving him a strength he had never known. He walked toward the administration office, where Catherine was waiting with a custody agreement, completely unaware that Abby was standing behind the door of the hospital room, silently watching him go with a heart full of conflict and pain. She understood that this war had only just begun, and the old wounds, now bleeding anew, would hurt her more than ever before she could find a true escape. The administrative office of the pediatric ward was shrouded in a thick silence, the kind that precedes judgments capable of altering a person's entire destiny. Ethan pushed the door open. The scent of new paper and strong tea did not soothe him. Instead, it felt suffocating. Catherine sat there, her back ramrod straight in a mahogany chair, her meticulously cared-for face unable to hide the lines of authoritarianism. On the table lay a thick folder, and next to it, a gold-plated fountain pen gleamed under the fluorescent lights. Brooke stood behind her, her hands resting lightly on the powerful woman's shoulders, a gesture that was both comforting and an assertion of her own allied status. "Sit down, son," Catherine said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was as sharp as a newly drawn blade. Ethan didn't sit. He leaned against the closed door, his arms crossed over his chest. His uniform was crisp, but his heart was in turmoil. "What are you planning, Mom?" "I'm not planning anything. I am simply doing what is necessary to protect the Pierce family bloodline." Catherine pushed the folder forward. "This is a settlement agreement. Miss Hayes will sign it, relinquish her parental rights, and receive a sum of money large enough for her to live comfortably in another city, or even abroad if she wishes. The boy will be brought to our home. I will provide him with the best upbringing, education, and the status he deserves. You will continue to be an elite Army doctor with no scandals about a premature child or a messy, unresolved divorce." Ethan looked at the folder, then at his mother. A bitter taste rose in his throat. "You think Abby's love for her son can be bought with money? You think I can live in peace, knowing it's built on the pain of the woman who suffered for me for 4 years?" "A mother's love," Brooke interjected suddenly, her voice soft but laced with venom. "Ethan, you're too naive. Do you know how Abby has lived for the past 4 years? I had someone do a preliminary background check. She lives in a slum on the outskirts of the city, constantly changing jobs. There was even a time she worked in some unsavory places. Is that a good environment for a child? Look at Noah, malnourished, with chronic pneumonia. Is that the result of the mother's love you're so determined to protect?" Ethan clenched his fists so hard his knuckles cracked. He didn't want to believe Brooke, but the truth of the cramped apartment and his son's poor health was something he had seen with his own eyes. It was like salt being rubbed into an open wound. "I'll see for myself," Ethan growled. That afternoon, Ethan took a few hours of personal leave. He didn't take a military vehicle but hailed a beat-up taxi to the address he had found in Abby's pocket the night before, a scrap of paper with a phone number and the address of her apartment, scribbled in haste as she rushed her son to the ER. The apartment building was tucked away in a narrow, grimy alley in a forgotten part of the city, a place where sunlight seemed too lazy to visit. The smell of open garbage bins mixed with the damp, musty odor from peeling walls created a suffocating atmosphere. Ethan stopped in front of apartment number 4. The warped wooden door was secured with a cheap, rusted padlock. Through a crack in the door, Ethan could see the interior. The room was less than 150 square feet. There was no bed, just a thin mattress on the bare concrete floor. In one corner sat a small, grease-caked portable gas stove and a few chipped plastic bowls. A clothesline stretched across the room held a few sets of children's clothes, worn out but washed clean, smelling of cheap laundry soap. Ethan's heart seized. He thought of his mother's mansion, with its spacious bedrooms, silk sheets, and staff of servants. He thought of himself at military functions, with fine wine and glowing accolades. While he was living in the glory of his ideals, his son, his own flesh and blood, was growing up in this abject poverty. "Who are you looking for?" A heavy-set, middle-aged woman in a loose tank top fanning herself walked over. "I'm an acquaintance of Abby, in number 4, Ethan said, composing himself. "Oh, Abby. That poor girl. Works herself to the bone, but her little boy is always sick. One time I saw her faint right at the end of the alley, starved herself to save money for his formula. What are you to her? You look so well-dressed. Why would you let them suffer like this?" Ethan couldn't answer. The landlord's question was like a death sentence for his conscience. He turned and walked away, his feet feeling as heavy as lead. The reality of Abby's life was even more brutal than Brooke had described. But it wasn't because Abby was unsavory. It was because she was too decent, too proud to ever come back and ask him for a single cent. That evening, Ethan returned to the hospital. Abby was sitting in the hallway, his army coat still on her shoulders, but she looked smaller and more frail than ever. "I just came from your apartment," Ethan said, his voice hoarse. Abby looked up, a flash of shock in her empty eyes, which quickly returned to their usual coldness. "Why did you go there? To see just how pathetic I am?" "To see what a failure I am," Ethan corrected, sitting down next to her, his hands clasped tightly together. "My mother wants to sue for custody. She has money, connections, and she has proof that you are not financially stable enough to raise Noah. If this goes to court, you will lose." Abby laughed, a sound like dry leaves scattering in winter. "To court? You people are going to use the law to steal the child I risked my life to give birth to? Ethan, do you have any humanity left? I don't want to take your son. I want to bring you both home." Ethan turned to look at her, his eyes burning with a mix of determination and pain. "But my mother will never agree. She and Brooke are working together. If you keep being stubborn and stay in that apartment, they will use it as leverage to take Noah away from you permanently." Abby trembled violently. She knew Ethan was right. In a battle between the poor and the powerful, justice was usually on the side with the money. She looked at her own thin hands, then through the glass to the hospital room where Noah slept peacefully with an IV in his arm. She realized she was standing on the edge of a cliff. "What do I do?" Abby whispered, her last ounce of resilience shattering. Ethan moved closer. He wanted to pull her into his arms, but his hands froze midway. "Don't make any deals with my mother. Don't sign anything she gives you. Let me handle this. I will use my honor as a soldier to guarantee that no one can separate you from our son, not even my own mother." "How? Are you going to defy your mother? Are you going to throw away the career you've worked so hard to build?" Ethan was silent for a long moment, looking toward the end of the hallway where the neon light flickered. 4 years ago, I chose my career, and I abandoned you. The result is that I have my rank and my reputation, but my soul is a wasteland. This time, I'm choosing my family. If the price of being a father and a husband is to take off this uniform, I'm willing to pay it. Abby looked at Ethan. For the first time in 4 years, she saw the man she had once loved so desperately. Not a cold, detached military doctor, but Ethan, the young man who had promised to protect her for life. But she was also afraid. His sacrifice was too great, so great she felt she couldn't bear the weight of it. Just then, Brooke approached from the stairwell, holding another folder. The feigned smile was still perfectly in place. "Ethan, Catherine wants you in Noah's room. It seems she's invited her private lawyer to have a little chat with Abby." Abby shot to her feet, her face pale with terror. Ethan grabbed her hand firmly. "Come with me. Don't be afraid." They walked toward the hospital room, where the cold, hard legal battle was no longer a threat, but was beginning to show its cruelest fangs. Catherine was standing there, next to a man in a cold, black suit, and Noah had just woken up, looking around in confusion at the strange faces surrounding his hospital bed, his eyes filled with fear. In the days following the confrontation in the administration office, the tension between Abby and Ethan's family was stretched as taut as a violin string. Catherine was quiet for the time being, but it was the quiet before a hurricane. Although Ethan insisted Abby stay in the hospital's guest quarters to be near Noah, she never stopped feeling a constant, gnawing anxiety. She wasn't afraid of Catherine's legal threats. She was afraid of the cold, calculating look in Brooke's eyes whenever they crossed paths in the hallway. Fortunately, Noah recovered quickly. The vitality of a growing child, combined with the dedicated care of the hospital's best medical team, brought the color back to his cheeks. That afternoon, Abby arranged for Noah to stay in the pediatric ward's supervised playroom so she could meet with a pro bono lawyer she had contacted. She needed to prepare for the worst. The meeting ran longer than expected. By the time Abby got back to the hospital, it was dusk. The pale yellow lights cast long, ghostly shadows across the concrete courtyard. She hurried toward the playroom, a sudden, baseless sense of dread rising in her heart. It was the same queasy feeling she'd had the day she decided to leave 4 years ago. "Miss Hayes, you're back!" The young caregiver ran out, her face frantic. "But I thought you said you were taking Noah to his grandmother's house." Abby froze, the purse in her hand dropping to the ground with a thud. The blood in her veins turned to ice. "What did you say? When did I pick him up? Which grandmother?" The caregiver's face went white. She stammered. "About 40 minutes ago. A woman in a white lab coat, wearing a hospital ID, said she was a relative of Dr. Pierce's. She said Dr. Pierce and Mrs. Pierce had asked her to take the boy home for dinner. She even showed him her phone. And Noah called out Aunt Brooke. So I thought, 'Brooke!' Abby shrieked. The sound tore through the hospital's quiet evening. Her world went black. She didn't need to hear the rest. That name was enough for her to understand what was happening. Brooke didn't just want to separate them. She wanted to destroy her. Trembling, Abby fumbled for her phone, her fingers slipping on the sweaty screen. She dialed Ethan. The phone rang for what felt like an eternity. "Pierce here," his calm, steady voice answered. He was on duty at the base. "Ethan, save our son!" "Brooke took Noah. She took him!" Abby screamed into the phone, tears streaming down her face, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The line went silent for a beat. There was no shocked gasp, no panic, just the sound of a sharp, deep intake of breath, the sound a soldier makes when receiving an emergency alert. "Where are you?" Ethan asked. His voice was hard as ice, yet it held a power that suppressed the terrifying panic spreading through her. "At the pediatric playroom." "I don't know what to do." "Stay right there. Do not move. I'm on my way." Ethan hung up. In the command center, he shot to his feet. The army doctor's face darkened, his jaw clenched, his eyes burning with a rage contained only by iron discipline. He didn't call the police immediately. The bureaucracy would take too long. And with someone as psychologically unstable as Brooke, every minute of delay put Noah in greater danger. He knew Brooke. Her obsession with him wasn't love, it was a sick possessiveness. And when she couldn't have what she wanted, she was capable of destroying it. Ethan sprinted to his car. The engine of the military jeep roared to life and sped off into the night. On the way, he put his phone on speaker and called a comrade at the military checkpoint near the hospital. "Check the security footage from Gate B, Walter Reed, timeframe 17:30 to 18. Look for a vehicle belonging to pharmacist Brooke Sinclair. License plate number. Report her direction of travel immediately. This is a critical situation involving a hostage." 5 minutes later, Ethan arrived at the hospital. Abby was crumpled on the floor, sobbing into her hands. Nurses surrounded her, trying to comfort her. When she saw Ethan, she scrambled to her feet and grabbed the front of his uniform, her thin fingers digging into the fabric. "Ethan, where is our son? Where did she take him? You're a doctor. You're a soldier. How could you let her do this?" Abby pounded on his chest, despair turning her frantic. Ethan didn't flinch. He grabbed her wrists, forcing her to look at him. "Abby, look at me. Calm down. Now, if you panic, Brooke wins. She wants to see us suffer. Do you want to save our son?" Ethan's sharp command was like a splash of cold water, pulling her back from the brink of hysteria. She nodded furiously, tears still falling, but she stopped screaming. "Get in the jeep. We're going to bring our son home." The vehicle tore through the streets like an arrow. Ethan drove with one hand, the other operating a GPS device. His comrade had just called back. Brooke's car was heading toward an abandoned industrial park north of the city, bordering an old military training ground. It was a desolate, dangerous area, filled with construction pits. Why? Why would she do this? Abby sobbed in the passenger seat. "Because she's insane, and because my family's selfishness enabled her insanity," Ethan gritted out, his eyes fixed on the road. He remembered all the times Brooke had hinted that things would be easier without the child. He had been too complacent. He had underestimated the cruelty of a woman with a wounded ego. Ethan's phone vibrated. A picture message from an unknown number. He glanced at it, and his heart stopped. It was a photo of Noah, lying unconscious on a dirty tarp. Next to him was an opened blister pack of a sedative. What's wrong with him?" Abby leaned over, saw the picture, and let out a piercing scream. "That medicine! What did she give him?" Ethan zoomed in on the photo. With his professional eye, he immediately recognized it as diazepam, a powerful sedative. A small dose would be enough to knock out an adult, but for a 4-year-old just recovering from pneumonia, it could cause respiratory failure, even cardiac arrest, without immediate medical attention. "Damn it!" Ethan slammed his fist on the steering wheel. "Listen to me, Abby," Ethan said, his voice dropping to a deadly calm. Brooke gave him a sedative. "We don't have much time. I need you to be strong. When we get there, I will approach her. You must not do anything to provoke her. Brooke is not a pharmacist anymore. She's a dangerous criminal." The jeep turned onto a rough dirt road leading into the abandoned factory complex. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the wind whistling through shattered window panes like the wails of lost souls. Ethan killed the headlights, leaving only the dim running lights on. The instincts of a Special Forces soldier took over. He parked about 200 yards from the main building and signaled for Abby to be completely silent. "Stay here. Lock the doors. No matter what happens, do not get out until I call you." "No. I'm going with you. I can't just sit here." Abby clutched his arm, her eyes pleading. Ethan looked at her. In the dim light, Her eyes shone with the extraordinary strength of a mother. He understood. Nothing could stop a mother searching for her child. He nodded, pulling a tactical flashlight and a combat knife from the glove compartment, tucking the knife into his belt. "Stay behind me. Step exactly where I step. Make no noise." They moved through the darkness, navigating piles of sharp scrap metal. The air was thick with the smell of damp, rust, and decay. Ethan followed the tire tracks in the wet clay, which led directly to a 4-story concrete shell of a building in the center of the lot. On the second floor, a faint light flickered from a room at the far end. A voice, eerily distorted and out of tune, was singing a lullaby that echoed through the silent space. "Hush, little baby, don't you cry." Abby clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a sob. It was Brooke's voice. Ethan signaled for her to stop. He pressed himself against a broken wall, peering inside. Brooke was sitting on the floor, her hair disheveled. In one hand, she held a gleaming scalpel. With the other, she was stroking Noah's still face. The boy lay motionless, his chest rising and falling weakly, his face pale under the light of a cell phone propped against the wall. "Brooke." Ethan stepped out, his voice calm and measured the tone used to negotiate with someone on a psychological precipice. Brooke jerked, pressing the scalpel against Noah's neck. She looked up, her eyes wild but filled with a sick delight at seeing him. "You came. I knew you would. See? I'm singing him to sleep. He's such a good boy. Not a crybaby like his mother." She cackled, the sound bouncing off the concrete walls. Abby, standing behind Ethan, saw her son lying there, his breathing shallow. She felt her heart being crushed. She wanted to lunge forward and tear the woman apart, but Ethan's hand, held behind his back, gave a sharp, definitive signal to stay put. "Brooke, you're a pharmacist. You know how dangerous that dose is for a child," Ethan said, taking slow, deliberate steps forward, his hands raised to show he was unarmed. His eyes locked onto hers, trying to establish a connection. "He's going into respiratory failure. If he dies, you lose everything. I will never forgive a murderer. But if you let me save him, we can still talk." "Talk?" Brooke shrieked, tears smearing her makeup. "Haven't I talked to you enough for the past 4 years? I sacrificed my youth. I catered to your mother. I smoothed the way for your career. And for what? So you could go back to this deadbeat who abandoned you, all because of that bastard child?" She pointed the scalpel toward Abby. "Why? Why her? She's poor and pathetic, but you love her. I have everything, and you don't want me." "Because she is the mother of my son," Ethan answered, his voice firm, maintaining a safe distance. He was calculating. 15 feet. Brooke was losing control. The scalpel was too close to Noah's carotid artery. "Mother, huh? Well, let's see if the great mother can save her son now." Brooke suddenly scrambled to her feet, grabbing Noah by the collar and hauling him up. The boy was still unconscious, his limbs dangling like a rag doll's. She staggered backward toward an unfinished wall, a gaping hole that opened to a deep construction pit filled with rebar below. "Don't!" Abby screamed, unable to bear it, and started to move forward. "Stay back!" Brooke roared, her feet teetering on the edge. "One more step, and I'll throw him down." "If I can't have happiness, then neither can you." Ethan froze, cold sweat pouring down his back. This was no longer a psychological game. It was a matter of life and death. He looked at Noah. The boy's chest was spasming, a sign of hypoxia. Time was running out. He needed a diversion. Ethan slowly lowered his hands and unclasped the military-issue watch on his wrist, the one Brooke had given him for his birthday 2 years ago. "Brooke, look at this," Ethan said, holding it up. "I still wear it. You think I don't care about you?" Brooke's gaze flickered. She looked at the watch, and for a split second, her hand holding the scalpel lowered slightly. "Ethan," she whispered. That was all he needed. The soldier's instincts took over. He didn't rush her. He threw the heavy watch with incredible force at her knife hand and lunged forward like a predator. "Ah!" Brooke cried out as the metal watch struck her wrist. The scalpel flew from her grasp. The impact sent her stumbling backward over the edge. In her panic, her other hand let go of Noah. The boy tumbled out of her grasp, falling toward the abyss. "Noah!" Abby's scream was primal. Ethan dove, his body sliding across the concrete floor. One hand gripped a piece of rebar sticking out of a pillar. With the other, he shot his arm out and, in a fraction of a second, caught the collar of Noah's shirt just as the boy slipped over the edge. Ethan's body dangled in the air, the weight of the child and the momentum threatening to rip his shoulder from its socket. Below, Brooke's scream ended abruptly with a sickening thud. Ethan didn't look down. He gritted his teeth, the veins in his neck bulging, and used every ounce of strength in his remaining arm to pull Noah up. "Abby, pull! Pull him up!" he roared. Abby scrambled forward, crawling to the edge. She reached out, grabbed her son, and dragged him to safety. The moment she had Noah in her arms, felt his warmth and his faint heartbeat, she broke down, sobbing without sound, her whole body shaking. Ethan managed to haul himself back onto the floor. He lay there, gasping for breath, his right arm numb and screaming with pain. But he didn't rest. He scrambled back up and crawled to them. "Let me check his breathing." Quickly, he pressed his ear to Noah's chest. Irregular heartbeat, shallow breaths. He needed CPR now. The sedative was too deep in his system. In the middle of the cold, abandoned building, under the faint beam of a flashlight, Ethan began performing CPR with practiced precision. "Come on, son. Dad's here." "Noah, breathe, son, breathe," Ethan whispered, his voice cracking. And then, a sputtering cough. Noah's tiny chest heaved. He let out a piercing cry, the sound of life being wrenched back from the brink of death. Abby threw her arms around both of them, 3 bodies clinging together in the darkness, tears and sweat mingling. At that moment, the wail of police sirens and an ambulance echoed from the distance, shattering the night. The long, nightmarish ordeal was finally coming to an end. But the cost had been devastatingly high. The ambulance siren wailed, a wounded cry racing against death through the city night. Inside the cramped vehicle, the air was a nauseating mix of rubbing alcohol, blood, and the musty smell of the abandoned building. Ethan sat slumped against the wall, his face pale and slick with sweat. His right arm hung uselessly, the joint dislocated and ligaments likely torn from the desperate rescue. Every jolt of the ambulance sent a fresh wave of agony through him, forcing him to bite his lip until it bled to stifle a groan. But his eyes, the eyes of a father and a doctor, were glued to the vital signs monitor attached to his son. SpO2 is up to 92%, heart rate 130. He's responding to the oxygen, the paramedic reported, her hands steadily pumping the ambu bag. Abby knelt beside the gurney, her hand gripping Noah's small, cold one. She wasn't crying anymore. Her tears had run dry. She looked from her son to Ethan, the man in the mud-caked uniform, one shoulder grotesquely slumped, still trying to check Noah's pupils with his good left hand. "Ethan." "Your arm," Abby whispered, her voice hoarse. "It's nothing, just a dislocation," he dismissed, his voice raspy but firm. "Noah's the priority. Brooke used an unknown dose of diazepam. He needs a gastric lavage and a flumazenil drip as soon as we arrive. Tell the attending physician he has a history of pneumonia. Be careful of aspiration." The ambulance screeched to a halt at the ER entrance. The doors burst open to flashing lights and a waiting medical team. They recognized Ethan instantly, the hospital's star surgeon, now returning on a stretcher, simultaneously a victim and a patient's father. "Major Pierce, what happened to you?" a colleague asked in horror. "Forget me. Save the kid." Sedative overdose, grade 2 respiratory failure, multiple contusions. "Move!" Ethan roared, using his last ounce of strength to help push his son's gurney toward the pediatric ER. Only when the doors swung shut, swallowing Noah and Abby's small forms, did Ethan finally allow himself to collapse as pain and darkness consumed him. An hour later, a heavy silence had fallen over the hospital. Catherine burst into the waiting area like a storm. Her elegant composure was gone, her hair a mess, her expensive silk scarf askew. She had just been briefed by the police. Brooke had kidnapped her grandson, nearly killed him, and was now in the ICU under police guard with shattered legs and a head injury. But what terrified her most was the news that her own son, Ethan, was severely injured. "Ethan? My grandson? Where are they?" Catherine cried, grabbing a nurse's arm. "Ma'am, please calm down. Doctor, Pierce is having his shoulder reset in the procedure room, and the boy is in the ICU, the nurse explained. Catherine staggered toward the procedure room. Through the slightly open door, she saw Ethan, shirtless, his muscular back covered in scratches and a massive, ugly bruise spreading across his right shoulder. 2 orthopedic surgeons were struggling to force the joint back into place. Ready, Ethan? 1, 2, 3. A guttural sound of suppressed agony, like the roar of a wounded animal, escaped Ethan's throat. Catherine pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a sob. Her son, her pride and joy, was broken because of a choice she had made. Ethan looked up and saw her. His eyes held no blame, but a cold, distant look that made her shudder. He motioned for the doctors to pause and limped out into the hall. "You're here, Mom," he said, his voice flat. "Your arm. What happened?" "That woman. How could she?" Catherine stammered. "She could because you gave her hope," Ethan cut in, his words sharp. "You used her to push Abby away. You thought she loved me?" "No. She loved the status you promised her. And when she couldn't have it, she was willing to destroy everything, including the grandson you claimed you wanted to protect." Catherine was speechless. Just then, the door to the pediatric ICU opened. Abby walked out, her body swaying. Her clothes were still torn and dirty, a patch of dried blood on her knee she hadn't even noticed. She saw Ethan and Catherine and walked straight toward them, her gaze like a razor. "Are you satisfied?" Abby asked, her voice raspy but powerful. "Your grandson just had his stomach pumped. He's 4 years old, 4. And he had to endure the vengeance of the woman you chose for your son. You said I wasn't worthy, that I was too poor to raise him. Well, I may be poor, but I never put my son's life on the line for greed and selfishness." I didn't know she was that crazy," Catherine trembled. "You didn't know? Or you didn't care?" Abby laughed, a humorless, broken sound. "If Ethan hadn't gotten there in time, if he hadn't risked his life, you would be at the morgue right now, identifying your grandson's body, Mrs. Pierce." The word morgue made Catherine's knees buckle. She collapsed, and Ethan caught her with his good arm, his own eyes filled with pain and regret as he looked at Abby. "Abby, how's Noah?" he asked. "The doctor said he's past the critical stage, but the sedative could have neurological effects. He needs to be monitored for 48 hours. She then looked at Catherine. "Go home. Don't let my son see you when he wakes up. I don't want him to be afraid of anyone else in this family." With that, Abby turned and walked back into the sterile white room where her son lay. Her lonely, slender back was that of a warrior. Catherine watched her go, then looked at Ethan's bruised arm. All her pride shattered. The police had shown her pictures of the scene, the abandoned building, the dark pit. She realized with chilling clarity that her money and power were useless there. Only a mother's fierce love and a father's selfless sacrifice had brought that child back from the dead. "Mom, I was wrong. I was so wrong," Catherine sobbed. Ethan sighed, a sound heavy with pain. "Go home and rest, Mom. The police will deal with Brooke. As for Abby and Noah, from now on, let me decide." He helped his mother to a chair and walked slowly toward the ICU. The throbbing in his shoulder was a constant reminder of the high price of his awakening. Through the glass, he saw Abby, her head bowed at her son's bedside, her hand holding Noah's. The scene was so tragic and yet so sacred, it made Ethan feel like a sinner, standing at the gates of a heaven he longed to enter but was afraid to defile. Outside, the winter rain began to fall, washing the city clean. But could it ever wash away the scars left on the souls who had just walked through the valley of the shadow of death? In the days following the nightmare, Noah was consumed by severe post-traumatic stress. During the day, he would sit huddled on his bed, clutching a worn teddy bear, his eyes constantly darting around. At night, the terror took hold. "Don't drop me! Mommy, help me!" he would scream in his sleep, thrashing wildly. One night, as Abby struggled to comfort him, a steady arm wrapped around them both. It was Ethan. His right arm was in a sling, but his left held Noah securely against his chest. "Noah, it's Dad. I'm here. No one will hurt you." "I caught the bad person," he said, his voice a calm, authoritative command. The boy slowly quieted, recognizing the scent of safety. He buried his face in Ethan's chest and sobbed. "Dad, don't go." "I'm not going anywhere. I'm standing guard. No monsters can get you." Abby watched them, tears streaming down her face. She saw Ethan wince in pain whenever Noah's movements jostled his injured shoulder, but he never let go. For the first time, she saw a real father, not in photographs, but in flesh and blood, in quiet, painful sacrifice. The psychologist recommended Noah be discharged to a calm, stable environment. Abby knew she couldn't return to the cramped apartment, but the thought of Catherine's cold mansion was equally unbearable. "Come home with me," Ethan said. "Not to my mother's house. To my apartment, the one the Army provides. It's secure, and most importantly, I'll be there." Looking at Noah, who was clinging to Ethan's finger, Abby knew she no longer had a choice. Her son needed his father. Ethan's apartment was modest but clean and bright. The days that followed were a slow, healing journey. Ethan took 2 weeks of leave. With only one good arm, he was clumsy, but endlessly patient. Abby would watch him struggle to build a Lego set for Noah, his face etched with concentration, a smile breaking out whenever Noah cheered. One rainy afternoon, she found Ethan fumbling with his shirt buttons. "Let me," she said softly. As her fingers brushed his chest, she felt the heat from his body and saw the dark bruises still mottling his shoulder. "Does it hurt much?" she asked. "It hurts," he answered honestly, his eyes meeting hers. "But not as much as the thought of losing you and Noah." "Abby," he said, gently tilting her chin up, "I know you're still scared. I'm not asking you to forgive me yet. Just give me a chance. I was wrong to let you fight alone. Now, let me fight with you." "What about your mother?" she whispered. "She came by yesterday," Ethan said, pointing to a container on the table. "She brought soup for Noah. She stood outside for a long time, just watching him play. She said she was sorry. She said she needs time to learn how to be a grandmother, not a ruler." Abby stared at the container. Beside it was a small note, for Noah. "I'm sorry, Grandma." For the first time, she felt a real shift. The horrifying incident had shattered not just their lives, but the pride and prejudice that had caused it. That evening, after Noah was asleep, Abby found Ethan on the balcony. She brought him a mug of warm milk. "Your pain medicine has probably worn off," she said quietly. "Thank you," he replied. "Ethan," Abby began, "I'm going back to work tomorrow. At the diner. I can't be idle forever." Instead of arguing, Ethan nodded. "Okay, but no more night shifts. Noah needs you in the evenings. During the day, I'll find someone to watch him. I'm going back to work soon, too." "With your arm like that?" she gasped. "I'm a doctor. If I can't operate, I can still teach, consult. I need to keep working. I want Noah to be proud of his dad." As she looked at him, she realized he had changed. He was no longer a brash young man, but a steady, resilient tree. Just as she was about to tell him she was starting to feel safe, his phone rang. It was his unit. His expression shifted from relaxed to serious. "Clear. I'll be there in 30 minutes, he said, hanging up. He turned to Abby, his eyes filled with a familiar, painful conflict. "You're leaving again, aren't you?" she asked, her voice trembling. "It's not a regular deployment," he said, taking her cold hand. "A major landslide on the border. They need an emergency medical team. I have to go." The old script. The familiar pain. Abby wanted to scream, but then she remembered him diving to save their son. She understood that this man was born to protect. "Go," she said, her voice surprisingly firm. "But you take care of that arm. If you come back broken, don't even think about facing me and Noah." A wide, relieved smile broke across Ethan's face. He leaned in and gave her a quick, passionate kiss on the forehead. "Yes, ma'am." He quickly changed into his combat fatigues, kissed the sleeping Noah goodbye, and left. Abby watched him go, but this time she didn't cry. She knew he would come back, because here, in this small home, she would keep a light on for him. 4 days later, the evening news crackled on the TV. Army medical teams have successfully reached the isolated village. During the rescue, Major Ethan Pierce, the team's lead doctor, sustained minor injuries while apprehending the leader of a counterfeit medical supply ring. The sewing needle pricked Abby's finger, but she felt nothing. On the screen, she saw him mud-caked, his arms still in a sling, his face gaunt but his eyes burning bright. He was alive. "Dad! Dad's on TV!" Noah shouted. Abby rushed to him, hugging him tightly, tears of relief streaming down her face. The next morning, a military jeep pulled up outside. Abby ran downstairs. Ethan stepped out, thinner, his uniform stained, his injured arm swollen. But when he saw her, all the exhaustion vanished from his face. "I'm home." 4 simple words that meant more than 1,000 promises. Abby threw herself into his arms, burying her face in his chest. Life settled into a new, stronger rhythm. Ethan's shoulder required another surgery and long-term physical therapy. He couldn't operate anymore, so he transitioned to teaching at the medical university. Some pitied the loss of his golden hands, but Ethan would just smile. "My hands can't hold a scalpel anymore, but they can hold my wife and carry my son. For me, that's enough." One weekend, the doorbell rang. It was Catherine, alone, holding a pot of soup and a large Lego set. She stepped inside awkwardly, her eyes falling on the simple, happy scene of Noah and Ethan playing on the floor. "Grandma!" Noah cried, running to her. He didn't hold a grudge, he just sensed the remorse in her eyes. Catherine knelt down, tears falling as she hugged her grandson. "Abby, I'm sorry," she said, her voice choked. "I was wrong. I thought money was what he needed, but he needs this. He needs a family. Thank you for not giving up on my son." 4 months later, they held a small ceremony on the base. Abby wore a simple white dress. Ethan wore his formal uniform, his newly polished major's insignia gleaming. He held Noah's hand with his left, and Abby's with his right. Standing before their friends and family, he looked at her. 4 years ago, I signed those papers because I thought I was setting you free. In reality, I was imprisoning myself in regret. I can't promise you wealth, and I can't promise I'll always be here, because I'm a soldier. But I promise that whenever you need me, I will come home. Whenever you fall, I will catch you. And whenever Noah cries, I will be the one to wipe his tears. Abby, will you be my wife again? Not out of duty, but because I love you." Through tears of joy, she nodded. That evening, the 3 of them walked through the park as the sun set. "Are you sad?" Abby asked, leaning her head on his shoulder. "That you can't operate anymore?" He looked at his right hand, the fingers still stiff. "No, this hand saved many lives, but it almost lost the 2 most important ones. Now, it can hold yours. That's all that matters." The autumn wind blew, carrying the sweet scent of a new season. Abby squeezed his hand. She knew there would still be long nights on duty, sudden deployments, and daily struggles. But she was no longer afraid, because she knew that after the storm, the sky isn't just clear, it's washed clean, brighter, and more beautiful than before.